It was a sunny, yet incredibly ill-fated day off the coast of Palawan, in the Philippines, in 1934. A Filipino freediver looking for food happened upon a treasure. For inside one of the most common of the reef's creatures, a giant clam, his eye caught a fateful flash of white. Curious and intrigued, he investigated, finding, resting within the shell of that clam, a pearl, glinting in the beams of light. But this was not just any pearl. It was matte white, like porcelain, lacking the iridescent shine of pearls that you might find on a necklace. It was also huge, nearly 10 inches long and irregularly shaped with bumps, folds, and creases that almost made it resemble a human brain. The pearl was mystifying, enticing, and so the diver took a breath and dove down to retrieve it, not knowing it would be the final breath of air he would ever take. His body was later found by his companions, one arm deep inside the clam, clutching the pearl. The clam had shut its massive shell on him, and, unable to escape, the diver drowned. His body, alongside the clam and the 14-pound pearl that had cost him his life, were retrieved and brought back to the mainland, where it grew into a local legend. On Palawan, it was named the Pearl of Allah, some say due to the visage of a turbaned man's face reflected in the pearl's shape, and it was presented to the chief, under whose care it remained for 5 years. That is, until a Filipino-American man by the name of Wilburn Dowell Cobb arrived on the island and took interest in the pearl. At first, the chieftain was reluctant to part with it, as no money could match its great religious and cultural significance. But after a series of events, led to Cobb miraculously saving the life of the chieftain's son from malaria, Cobb had earned respect, honor, and the prize of the pearl supposedly given to the people of Palawan by God himself. Cobb took the pearl and returned stateside, deciding to showcase it as an artifact, choosing to display it at Ripley's Museum in New York in 1939. As news spread of the pearl's display, it attracted the attention of another man, someone who immediately recognized the pearl as something far more than an astounding natural phenomenon. This man, from China, enigmatically only known as Mr. Li, arrived at the exhibit and approached Cobb to tell of the pearl's true origins, which traced all the way back to the 6th century and the lands of ancient China. To hear Li tell it, the founder of Taoism, Lao Tzu himself, felt his own death approaching, and to ensure peace in the world, he gave one of his disciples, a descendant of the Li family, an amulet carved entirely of jade with the faces of Buddha, Confucius, and himself. The amulet was to represent a legendary friendship of the 3 sages with differing views, an icon of goodwill and understanding. To ensure peace and good fortune was brought into the future, Lao Tzu instructed his disciple to implant the amulet safely within the tissues of a clam, which was to be left undisturbed for 4 years so that a pearl would grow around it. And so, peace, wealth, and good fortune was ushered into the world and brought joy to those who kept the pearl's secret. Over the years, the pearl grew. It grew and grew and grew, needing to be transplanted into bigger and bigger clams as the years pressed on. Knowing the dangers and temptation of such power, the Li family implanted the pearl into the only remaining clam with the size to hold it, a giant clam, Tridacna gigas. They decided to hide it from the world by shipping the entire clam, pearl, and jade amulet inside to the Philippines in 1750. Perhaps it was always fated, or perhaps the pearl was not meant to be separated from the Li lineage, but tragedy struck the shipping vessel when a typhoon destroyed it off the coast of Palawan. The clam sunk alongside the wreckage, settling onto the reef where it rested, waiting, growing, and keeping its secrets until it was discovered that day by one very unfortunate diver, nearly 200 years later. Lee insisted that this was the true tale, meaning that the true name of the pearl was the Pearl of Lao Tzu, honoring the story and the treasure contained inside. Mr. Lee, in tears, offered Cobb $3.5 million for its return, but Cobb declined, knowing that the pearl should never be sold for money. From then, Mr. Lee vanished into the ether, never to be seen again. Mr. Cobb, content with his ownership, held on to the pearl, even taking it with him around the world, until his death in 1979. Now, if you think that this tale is too fantastical to be true, well, then you'd absolutely be right. There may be some bits of this story that have basis in reality, but most of what I just said was a big lie. Yes, embellished, made up, hyperbole of the truth, a mysterious myth, a legendary legend. Now, the Pearl of Lao Tzu itself is real. You can look to the show notes for a visual. But the rest of the story is filled with falsehoods, perpetuated largely by Wilburn Cobb himself. Most of this fantastical tale is from personal written and published accounts of Mr. Cobb, who likely fabricated the entire story for clout, or to increase the perceived value of the otherwise worthless pearl. See, without the nacre, or mother of pearl, that makes gem pearls so valuable, the real value of the Pearl of Lao Tzu is up for considerable debate. As much as I love a good tale like this, not a single fact in this story can be verified, and many plot holes and harmful stereotypes exist within the story itself. For instance, there are no known or recorded instances of a human being ever being drowned by a clam. The purported timelines of pearl growth do not match with clam lifetimes in fact, and there is no evidence that a Mr. Lee from China, who wept and begged to buy the pearl back, ever existed in the first place. See, Cobb was a storyteller, and in the end, his story is where he found value in the pearl. But perhaps not by intention, this story long outlived his life. It grew and was further embellished by those that held the pearl after him. The mysterious artifact has touched and impacted the lives of many, including a few who have never even heard the name the Pearl of Lao Tzu. There have since been legal battles and conniving cons, even murder, in the lives of those surrounding the pearl. The fact that such a fascinating fictional story about a humble animal has led to such crazy real-life consequences, well, it really speaks to the power of stories about natural creatures and their biology. At the heart of this particular story is one Tridacna gigas, one of many species of giant clam who, just because they do what clams do, unwittingly became the star of a now 100-year-old hoax. So today, let's talk about the giant clam, the fascinating biology and ecology of the animal that made the Pearl of Lao Tzu. This humble yet amazing animal has contributed quite a lot to our history, mythos, and culture, and it may hold the key to unlocking a new vision for humanity's future. So, for the first time in quite some time, let's descend. Hey there! You're listening to Season 2 of Bio-Diversity, the podcast about pelagic paradigms and coral curiosities, each episode bringing the finest in flippin' fun fish facts straight to your ear holes. It's like we're the delivery drivers of peer-reviewed aquatic science, the Grubhub of fish food for your mind, the DoorDash of dope decapods. Here on the show, we examine the weird, wacky, and wonderful diversity of life that lives under the sparkling waters of our blue home. Using science as our guide, we dive deep into both the common and the rare, the exotic and the ugly. So tune in for the Tridacna, stick around for the Cyphozoans, let's descend. Today on the show, we're talking mollusk. Specifically, the mollusks known as giant clams. And when I say giant, I mean giant. Like, you could take a bath in the empty shell of some of the largest specimens. The largest giant clam on record measures 4.5 feet, that's 1.37 meters, long, and its shell, with nothing in it, weighed 550 pounds, or 250 kilograms. This clam has got the chonk. You can find images of these clams in the show notes or gracing the cover art of this podcast episode. They are simply stunning. Their massive, ridged shells often resemble waves, with all kinds of rugged and intriguing texture the closer you look. Inside that shell is a mantle, a cloak-like fleshy palette of moving, iridescent color that quite literally shines in the sunlight. Often you'll see stunning electric blues, energetic shades of purple, glowing neon greens, even browns, yellows, and oranges are possible among the swatches of color that's seen in these species. That mantle is also what's responsible for secreting and creating the real pearl of Lao Tzu. See, like oysters, giant clams can secrete nacre around lodged irritants to create pearls. Only giant clam pearls are usually not shiny and usually not very highly valued. Giant clams are native to many shallow reefs all around the Indo-Pacific, and if you've seen one before somewhere, be it by photograph, diving, or playing way too much Animal Crossing during COVID, it was probably Tridacna gigas. Of all 12 species of giant clam out there, this is the species that people usually call the giant clam. It's the largest and probably most iconic of them all. But for you taxonomy nerds out there are 11 other species distributed across 2 separate genera, including, but not limited to, the fluted giant clam and the small giant clam in the genus Tridacna, and the fun-to-say Hippopus clam in the genus Hippopus, which, yes, makes the scientific name Hippopus hippopus. I dare you to try saying that without smiling. For you etymology nerds out there, the Tridacna genus comes with another fun story. It comes from 2 root words, tri, meaning 3, and dacno, meaning to bite. Kind of a confusing name. 3 bites? What are they eating in 3 bites? Some might lean on the clam's reputation as a killer to explain this. Rumor mills have gone wild throughout history about the clam's penchant for slaying humans and other animals. Stories of sharks getting clamped down upon and held in place. Stories of divers caught by the foot and drowned. In the 30s, the New York Times even reported on the, quote, nightmare bivalve of the Australian seas. And heck, the fabricated story I just presented you with started with death by giant clam. The giant killer narrative was so prevalent that in World War II, U.S. Navy soldiers even underwent training on how to free themselves should they find themselves locked in the clam's wavy grasp. I mean, I would watch that terrible bee monster movie about a giant clam uprising, but these myths are just that. There is no historic or scientific evidence that has ever attributed a human death to a giant clam. They are more on the gentle giant side of being big, usually closing very slowly, and some of them not even able to fully shut. So, while it might theoretically be possible to get trapped, you would almost have to be trying to do so. But if it's not us falling prey to a clam with hungry intent, then what does 3 bites for a name even mean? Well, lucky for us, we have the works of Roman naturalist Pliny the Elder to explain things. In his book, Natural History, he writes that Tridacna was named thusly, wishing it to be understood thereby that they are so large as to require 3 bites in eating them. Man, see, that is so poetic and creative. They just don't name things like they used to. Etymology and taxonomy aside, the biology and the ecology of these animals is also so dang cool. We are covering a lot of ologies today. From a biology perspective, not only are they big and beautiful, there is purpose to their beauty. We'll start by taking a deeper look into the most striking feature of the clam, which is that literally shining iridescence that glows on the clam's mantle in all sorts of different colors. Most features of animals usually have some sort of purpose or reasoning behind them, and I don't think these clams are going to be walking down the runway in like a fashion show anytime soon. So why the showy glow? See, underlying the need for this luster is the clam's unique feeding strategy. These animals are gigantic and have a lot of cool evolutionary advantages, but they don't have fins. Or legs. That would be weird. But it means that the reality underlying clam existence is simply that they cannot move. They're sessile. So they have to find a way to feed, and they can do that a couple of different ways. First off, like a lot of sessile organisms, they filter feed. They can take in seawater through a large opening, filter out the small tasty plankton, and siphon the seawater back out. Yet, as often as the clams do this, some studies point to the fact that as little as 30% of their nutritional needs come from filter feeding. What the heck? Plankton are good enough to primarily sustain whales, yet somehow not good enough for you, clam? The other 70% of their nutritional needs comes from outer space. Well, I mean, in a manner speaking. What I mean to say is that these clams photosynthesize, just like plants do. Well, in a manner of speaking, again. They aren't the ones actually doing the photosynthesis, but they are farming it. See, deep within the cells and tissues of the clam's mantle exist single-celled microscopic creatures called dinoflagellates, a form of phytoplankton that can perform photosynthesis like a plant and derive chemical energy from the sun. Researchers often use the term zooxanthellae, which is another more colloquial and catch-all term for the incredible diversity that is these microbes. One partner in the elegant clam-microbe symbiosis. These little guys are the ones doing all of the photon work like little energy factories, producing energy not only for themselves but also sugars and amino acids, the building blocks of proteins for their host clam. The clam gobbles up these products, and in return, they provide a pretty ideal environment for the zooxanthellae. It's protected and clean, plus they can utilize some of the waste products generated from the clam itself. It's not a perfectly circular system, of course, but it is still pretty cool. There is an interesting problem, though. The deeper inner parts of the clam's tissues, where some zooxanthellae live, are actually really dark. It's not the most ideal place for an organism that needs the sun. So that is where the iconic glow of the clam factors in, and where this symbiotic relationship gets really special, because once again we get to talk about physics. Specifically, quantum clam physics. As I would hope you would already know, fish physics are at least 153% cooler than regular physics, but quantum clam physics? We are on a whole new level here. I'm not even sure we can quantify how much cooler those are than regular physics. And, we'd probably change the result just by measuring it anyway. The specific cells in the clam's mantle that shine are called iridocytes, which you can kind of think of as a crystal filter for light. And that's because they are made of literal crystals, of guanine and plates of protein. They're arranged together in alternating layers called a Bragg mirror. That's Bragg with 2 G's. Like a mirror that you may be more familiar with, the iridocytes reflect some of the incoming sunlight back away from the clam. Those are the wavelengths of the beautiful colors that we see. But the wavelengths of light that we don't see, the ones that aren't reflected back, pass all the way through the iridocyte filter, a biologically engineered way to ensure that the clam's dinoflagellate buddies sitting in the dark are not just getting light, but they're getting the most optimal wavelengths of light shown directly on them. And that's just step 1. We haven't even mentioned the word quantum yet, but don't worry, we're getting there. Beyond the filter, the zooxanthellae are arranged inside the clam in a very intentional pattern. They're stacked on top of each other in a pillar-like formation. Sometimes you can actually see this with the naked eye. Around and beneath the iridocytes, you might see parts of the mantle that are colored black. Those are the bunches and bunches of dinoflagellates stacked on top of each other. Think of it kind of like a solar panel on a house, just in column form instead of giant flat panels. Human-made solar panels take up a lot of space because they need to catch a lot of the sun's rays in order to produce energy. In fact, the sheer amount of space that spread-out panels need to occupy is one of the leading challenges in solar energy today. But the giant clam's tightly packed column of phytoplankton that takes up so little space generates energy so efficiently that it puts our designs to shame. Again, we can look to the iridocytes. Not only do they filter incoming light to the right wavelengths, they scatter it too. And not in the chaotic way that word implies, but rather super intentionally, in such a way that any incoming light is near perfectly distributed along the columns of phytoplankton. Add to this system the fact that the clam can move its mantle tissue around and inflate it or deflate it in response to changing light conditions, and you get this insane energy system that ensures these photosymbiotic cells receive a constant and even amount of near perfectly curated light. That is a pretty sweet deal for the zooxanthellae. No wonder they decided to rent a villa here. So, in a very real way, giant clams are a living solar panel. And a recent study into the actual efficiency of the system is insane. Using models to calculate, a team from Yale suggests evidence that this system is at least, at a minimum, 67% quantum efficient. Are you impressed? I bet you're impressed. The more sci-fi a name sounds, the more impressive it is. Okay. The actual math involves a lot of physics about photons and electron charges, but at its core, quantum efficiency is just a really fancy way to measure how much energy from the sun is actually converted into chemical energy that is, usable. Current solar panel technology, while very impressive, sits at around 20% quantum efficiency. So this new research suggests that at a bare minimum, clams are more than 3 times more efficient at solar power than we are. And that 67% is the lower bound of their model's estimates. The number could actually be a lot higher. Like I said before, one of the biggest problems in modern solar energy is the problem of how we make it space efficient, and the giant clam has already given us a possible solution. With this information in our pockets, there's already talk of pursuing clam-like biorefineries to help with the energy needs of the future. Picture it. Building a clam of the future, an energy plant designed with similar materials to create a similar system of light scattering and use, optimizing the light for living algae feedstocks, and creating a way for us to generate power from living algae instead of the ancient dead ones that comprise our fossil fuels. See, I never thought clams would be a viable part of the climate conversation, but here we are. #clams for climate. The mantle of the clam is an extraordinarily heavy lifter. In addition to housing zooxanthellae and helping perform filter feeding, it's also what's responsible for building the clam's home, its shell. See, like most clams and other bivalves, giant clams secrete their shell from their mantle to protect themselves from predation. The process through which the clam creates its shell is not a super rare one, but it is called biomineralization, which is an extremely cool word. The process uses proteins built from their photosynthetic partnership and ones obtained through filter feeding, using them to build a protein scaffold on which to create its shell. Think of it kind of like rebar for human building construction. And over that rebar of proteins, they can then put down layers of a very common, yet very special mineral, calcium carbonate, which it gets by filtering calcium and carbonate ions directly from seawater. Like cement that fills in gaps reinforced by the rebar, the clam's shell is, at its core, layered calcium carbonate over proteins. What makes this truly mind-blowing is that this simple core combination of 2 ingredients can result in incredible variation of final shell properties and shape. See, mollusks can alter the type, amount, and structure of the scaffolding protein, and small changes in these variables results in a different shell material when you layer that same mineral of calcium carbonate on top of it. One arrangement of these ingredients might result in the hard, rough, and bumpy outer layer of the shell to deflect predators. Yet another combination results in the calcite crystals of the middle layer that actually make it hard to break. Yet a third combination of these same materials forms aragonite, or in some mollusks what you might know as mother of pearl, or nacre. Now, this ability is not unique to the giant clam. Many mollusks can do it, But it is why you see such a stunning array of shapes and textures in seashells. Same building blocks, different built structures, purposes, and results. It's all the creativity of Lego, only you can't misplace and then step on the pieces later on. And they make the building blocks themselves. Oh, and the shape of the shell depends on the shape and position of the mantle's aperture, or opening, as it secretes the shell, something it does very intentionally to keep the whole clam positioned in a way that it faces the sun, and in a way that it can close when it's threatened by predators. All of this intelligent building and design, all without what we would consider a brain. Pretty impressive. This fantastic evolutionary design may inspire energy factories of the future to be clam-shaped. Oh, great Poseidon, I hope they inspire energy factories of the future to be clam-shaped. But it turns out that we already owe a lot, past and present, to the existence of giant clams. These animals are at home in coral reef ecosystems, and can absolutely be cornerstones of the reefs that they are a part of. And I mean that in both the squishy biological, I contribute to the ecosystem through my activities way, but also the physical way. They are giant clams with giant shells after all, so they are literally part of the reef. All of that shell building work we just talked about is super important to keep the clam safe, big, and healthy, sure, but it also turns out to be important to the health and structure of the reefs that they call home. Just like coral skeletons, which, by the way, are also made of calcium carbonate, the sessile clams form part of the reef structure, adding variability and what researchers call rugosity, a fancy term that measures how not smooth a surface is. Clams add this extra not smoothness in a few different ways. The extra varied surfaces on the clamshell itself provide a home for species like barnacles or encrusting algae that like to live on the surfaces of other animals, and the uneven shapes of the shell structures can also help create hiding spots for fish and other animals that like to use them. High rugosity is actually something a healthy reef really wants. You don't want an entire reef to be made of one type of coral, or even just a small diversity of corals. The more diverse and rugose a reef, that is, the more species of clams and corals and sponges, etc. that help build it, the more abundant and diverse the rest of the life on that reef can become. That, of course, means more fish, eels, lobsters, crabs, sharks, rays, and a prettier reef, but it also means that the reef itself might have an easier time recovering from adverse events, like diseases, bleaching, or marine heat waves. A more diverse reef also brings human benefits. Many fisheries, from the subsistence to the artisanal to the commercial, are all dependent on reefs. And even though their defenses are pretty great, giant clams still do get eaten, especially the juveniles, by octopus, crabs, snails, and more. And if all of those benefits weren't enough, they also bring some incredible health advantages for neighboring corals, too. Circle back to those magical solar-powered microbes known as zooxanthellae. If you didn't know, clams are not the only animals that rely on this partnership trick. Most corals also partner with communities of zooxanthellae in a similar fashion. In fact, all the striking colors of corals are usually because of these zooxanthellae, and just like giant clams, healthy corals get a lot of nutrients from the photosynthetic activity of their hosted algae communities. But when things become stressful for the corals, like when waters get way too warm, corals and clams alike will both expel their algal tenants and lose their color, becoming a bone-chilling white. In a nutshell, this is the process of bleaching, which corals and clams do in an attempt to protect and cleanse themselves of overactive, now potentially damaging, zooxanthellae. This helps reduce stress on the animal in the short term, but now they find themselves with a problem, a lack of their major food source. Without a healthy and diverse zooxanthellae microbe population, the animal will die of starvation. Luckily, both corals and clams can recover from this, for instance if the temperatures return to normal and they can be recolonized with microbes before they starve. But the problem, outside of consistently rising ocean temperatures caused by human activity that ceaselessly causes record heat waves year after year and makes them subject to more and more stress year after year, is that corals and clams simply cannot make zooxanthellae. These microbes have to arrive and colonize them from an external origin, like alien invaders that just want you to be happy. And for corals, some researchers are now theorizing that one possible external origin could be the giant clams. It's been demonstrated that clam fecal pellets, yes, we're talking about clam poop, can be chock full of still viable undigested zooxanthellae. Essentially, clams can poop excess super useful microbes back into the wild water column, which have then been observed in a lab situation to be taken up and utilized, at least in part, by baby corals. This and other studies on giant clam poop is now leading some scientists to theorize that giant clams act as reservoirs of these critical microbes. A lot like we store water, only it's a stock of life-giving photosynthetic dinoflagellates. Under this theory, you can imagine a scenario where giant clam poop from a neighboring healthy reef could help heal sick corals looking to reestablish their microbe populations after bleaching. Isn't nature beautiful? Okay, I'm sorry, I have to take just a little detour here. Can you imagine being the scientists conducting that study? Like, here, baby coral, here's your clam poop, eat up. And then having it work? The things we do to learn about the natural world makes me proud and somewhat disgusted to be alive. The pride half, though, is important to remember as we go into today's last topic, which can always be a little bit of a downer. And that's our evolving relationship with the giant clams as humans. Big surprise, giant clam populations are not what they used to be. And the main driving reason behind it? No surprise, it's us. It's always been us. And two of the biggest reasons will ring familiar: climate change and overharvest. Jumping right on in with the existential, ocean temperatures globally have been trending upward, and there is measurably more carbon dioxide in our atmosphere with each passing year. Both of these things, interrelatedly, are problems for our giant clam friends. Warming waters, as previously mentioned, can cause the clams to bleach in a manner similar to corals. They'll expel their zooxanthellae and starve to death unless temperatures stabilize. But a less visible problem exists as well, and that's the sheer amount of carbon dioxide just floating around in our air. See, some of that carbon dioxide, CO2, gets absorbed by the ocean. In fact, a fair amount of it does, about 30%. But when that happens, a bunch of ocean chemistry converts that CO2 into acids that lower the pH of the whole ocean. One of those acids that's created is carbonic acid, which is created when carbonate ions in the water react with the CO2. All right, bonus points science test time. Where else in this podcast did we mention carbonate ions? And what could less of them in the water mean for our giant clams? 30 seconds on the clock. I'll take your answer in the form of a question. Okay, sorry about the surprise test. Who am I, my middle school science teacher? The answer is that an acidic ocean makes the shell building that the clams do a lot harder. Remember that they filter carbonate ions alongside calcium ones from the water, and they use those raw materials to build the calcium carbonate for their shells. Less carbonate ions in the water means it could be harder for the clams to build and maintain healthy shells to begin with. And an acid ocean will eat away at shells that already exist. Acid's gonna do what acid's gonna do. And that can be a pretty significant long-term problem as vulnerable populations try to recover. I liken giant clams to trees in a weird way. They are extremely slow to grow and recover. Giant clams don't reach sexual maturity until 5 to 12 years of age and can live more than 100 years in the wild. And a lot of their reproduction is up to tides and fate, to put it poetically. To put it scientifically, giant clams are broadcast spawners, meaning that nearby hermaphroditic clams will coordinate and release both sperm and eggs into the water in hopes of those two things finding each other, fertilizing, mixing genetics, and finding new areas to colonize and grow. It's less of a when two clams love each other very much, and more of a coordinated, reproductive roll of the dice spectacle. Only clams? The endgame of all of this, though, is that, like forests, populations of giant clams can take a very, very long time to recover after being wiped out by disease, bleaching, or overharvest. Which, as colonization and globalization have taken root over history, raising demand for their meat and shells as global delicacies and ornaments, whoo boy have they been overharvested. Giant clams have been a pretty important food source for humans throughout history, and are considered something of a delicacy today. Take the islands of Palau, where clams were a beloved staple to their indigenous people. They can be tender enough to be eaten raw with citrus, and versatile enough to be cooked into rice bowls, coconut milk soups, or even pancakes. And the relatively easy harvesting of these clams meant it served as a food staple when weather was too rough for fishing. And remember, back in the old days, these clams were super abundant. All you had to do was wade a little bit out into the shallows to find whole reefs made of them. But beginning around the turn of the 20th century, the 340-plus islands that make up the nation were claimed and heavily exploited by world powers in succession. Spain, then Germany, then Japan, then, after World War II, the United States. These occupations displaced the indigenous peoples who stewarded the land before, and ushered in an age of extraction. These harvesting pressures on the reefs didn't just come from the island's occupiers either. Driven by demand for the gorgeous shells and the coveted meat, international interests like China and Taiwan began pushing into the Pacific Islands to fish as early as the 1960s. In the 1990s, fishing boats from the Philippines and Indonesia attacked these reefs with cyanide, dynamite, and huge nets, not only after giant clams, but sharks, groupers, turtles, and more. The biodiverse gems of the Palauan reefs were an international prize to be raided, no longer a natural treasure to be respected. The story is really driven home by one account of former Palauan Governor Thomas Patrice. When interviewed for a National Geographic article in 2024, he recalled his childhood. During low tide on his home island, the birds would return from the day's hunt flying so close to the reef that myriads of giant clams would squirt glistening water from their siphon up into the air. Yet within one lifetime, this stunning phenomenon has ceased. He could not show his own children the wondrous spectacle he himself remembers. Giant clams have gone from abundant and thriving to rare and endangered, the highlight of a dive or a beach day rather than a common backdrop. Long story short, populations of giant clams are not what they once were. But rather than focus on the gloom and doom of it all and overstate the potential consequences of losing these reef-building, sparkly zooxanthellae reservoirs, I think it's important to focus on the over part of overharvest. There are examples of indigenous people around the world who have discovered their own overharvest and self-corrected, successfully using giant clams as a food source while stewarding and giving back to their populations. To continue the story of Palau, the traditional practice of bull, that's B-U-L, is an example of this reciprocity, a prohibition of catching certain species during known spawning times. By allowing species the time to recover and the peace to reproduce, it seems possible to create a give-and-take dance that rests somewhere between destroy and take everything in the environment and close off everything forever, don't touch nature. This is, of course, way easier said than done. There is always pressure for those that need to make a living harvesting resources from the sea to continue to make that living, and people do need to eat. Add on top of that, knowledge of spawning times, reef composition, and other environmental factors can be quite different depending on the locality, the environment, and the culture. Solutions that work in one area might be completely ineffective in others, which is to say that the right answers aren't exactly laid out in front of us, even on paper. But there is hope, especially if we continue to work in partnership with each other. newer generations are increasingly interested in combining historical practices like bull with the knowledge of Western science to create a new path of stewardship going forward. Western science may help us understand things like clams are triggered to spawn by detecting a chemical called spawning-induced substance in the water, their clever mechanism for coordinating and releasing all the eggs and sperm at the same time. That fact may be useful for looking into culturing and farming these clams for restoration or for food. While at the same time, traditional ecological knowledge may help us learn when spawning events can occur, using clues from the tides, the phases of the moon, and more. It can help us understand the specific ecologies of each unique location. Using this knowledge together and in collaboration can form an incredible basis for solutions and policy. Some of this is already taking shape. Farming of giant clams to reduce pressure on wild stocks is already happening. Local governments are discussing local stewardship and indigenous-led practices like bull. All 12 giant clam species are listed in some form under CITES, the Convention on Trade in Endangered Species, which is an international law meant to protect endangered animals from global trade. And as a weird side note, here in the US, the National Marine Fisheries Service has proposed listing all 10 Tridacna species under the Federal Endangered Species Act, even though giant clams don't occur in United States waters. If passed, this listing would protect these species from import, export, and trade within the United States. A powerful statement. This kind of knowledge sharing, trust building, decision making, policy forging, and following, it's hard work. Every step in this conversation has lots of nuance and multiple sides. For instance, it's easy to think that listing Tridacna species as endangered in the United States is a slam-dunk conservation move. But there are those who would argue that that would shut down any possibility of United States-based clam farming. And instituting co-stewardship and knowledge sharing is not just a snap-of-the-fingers policy. Given the incredible history of oppression and exploitation of indigenous peoples all around the world, partnering and sharing knowledge also involves rebuilding and restoring trust and addressing historical wrongdoings. But these discussions are important, critical even, to think about, because in this humble podcast host's opinion, solutions for a brighter future are absolutely possible. I don't have all of the answers, and yes, I tend to be a bit of a dreamer, but if done right, that bright future might have climate-friendly, clam-shaped biorefineries, new opportunities for co-stewardship of nature being supported over exploitation, and a future where we just might have more sparkling, electric, beautiful giant clams gracing our oceans. That's going to do it for today's episode of Bio-Diversity. Hopefully the wait wasn't too bad. Sorry about that. Turns out grad school takes a lot of time and effort. Giant clams are an incredible animal, and they represent many things that excite me about marine biology and conservation. They have an incredibly fascinating natural history and an important role within the ecosystems in which they reside. They're a food source to be respected, inspiration for fantastical and crazy stories, a font of engineering design inspiration. And they challenge us to have hard conversations and take bold conservation action towards a better future. I hope you've enjoyed this episode and have some new clam facts and topics to bring up at your next gathering of friends and family. It is well known that spitting clam facts makes you super cool. As always, thank you for listening. I'll see you next time.